Hello everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Cindy Berrichon and I would like to welcome you to Xceed Group's DevOps webinar on how to prepare the enterprise for DevOps adoption and implementation. But before we start, there are a few things I'd like you to do. Firstly, please can you change your screen name so that we know who we are talking to. To do this, click on the icon of a person at the top of the screen. Your connection will be at the very top of the list. Click to change it. Secondly, please maximize the viewing window. To do this, click on the magnifying glass icon and choose full screen. Thirdly, we will be taking questions via the chat window, but at the end of the webinar. To ask a question, just click on the speech bubble icon. Please note that during the webinar, your phone lines will be muted. Finally, we will be recording this webinar, so if you miss something or want to share it with your colleagues, don't worry, you'll be able to review it afterwards. For your awareness, we will also be live tweeting throughout on @XceedGroup using the hashtag DevXWeb. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you will enjoy the webinar, and without further delay, I will hand over to our CTO, Phil Starrett.
Thanks very much, Cindy. First of all, thank you everybody for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. Hopefully you'll find today informative. We'll have some real life sort of examples of what we've done and the approach that Xceed takes. Before we actually get into the webinar itself, I'd like to introduce myself properly. So as Cindy said, I'm the Group CTO at Xceed, and within that, DevOps falls very much within my realm as one of my practice areas that we sort of offer out as a service to our customers. My background is I've 20 years on the customer side of things, the last 5 years at Barclays where I had various roles, one of which was actually where I started to drive and execute on the DevOps and the dev and test transformation strategy. I joined Xceed in July last year, where I look after 4 or 5 practice areas, of which I said DevOps is one. I'd like to introduce Dan.
Thanks very much, Phil. Daniel Hurst, structured within the CTO group at Xceed, and I'm currently involved in a large DevOps transformation in a retail bank here in London. Developer in a former life, and I'm passionate about and have some expertise in service virtualization, code analytics and agile methodologies. Today I'll be discussing what makes an enterprise different with respect to a DevOps implementation, and really how to structure your introduction of DevOps in the enterprise for maximum success.
And Ben?
Great, thanks Phil. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Saunders, and I'm a Senior Managing Consultant in Phil's CTO practice. My background before joining Xceed focused on data center builds and migrations. However, for the last 2.5 years, I've been working with a number of our clients to help formulate their continuous delivery and DevOps strategies with specific focus on service virtualization and release automation. Much of my enthusiasm is very similar to Dan's, so I'm looking forward to presenting to you all today and explain how we can add some value to your own enterprises and how best to integrate DevOps into your software development lifecycle. Phil, over to you.
Great, thanks guys. Right, so what we're going to try and cover today is the main theme is how you adopt DevOps into a large organization. And the 3 main themes that we'll talk about is how you assess your readiness for the adoption, how you would go about preparing a delivery plan, and sort of prioritize the initiatives in what you need to do, and the sort of domains that you would focus on in order to do this. And then finally understanding what the business case should look like, how to socialize it, how to identify the key stakeholders, and more importantly, how to educate them and sort of get them bought into the vision so you get the sponsorship from the top down. Some of the key themes that we at Xceed believe are key drivers behind any adoption in a DevOps transformation is around time, cost and quality. Through my experience, basically your CTOs, your CIOs, your heads of development, your business leads, they want to do things quicker, they want to do things cheaper, and they want better quality services and products. And hopefully what you'll see today is how we start to address all of those challenges and start to drive those types of benefits. So when we start to look at some of the challenges as we implement change across an enterprise, you've got different types of stakeholders and doers. So from the developers who might spend a lot of idle time waiting for environments to be ready so they can do their development, the actual environments management people and the teams that sort of they don't have the capacity or the scheduling's wrong, operations, so in production when there's an incident, who's actually built this code, who's designed it, who's developed it, who knows how it works, and all of these things hook back into that sort of cycle of change across the life cycle. You also get the testers who are looking and saying, well, actually, it might be that we don't have the right type of data or the controls around the data in terms of obfuscation and normalization, or it could be as simple as, actually, our test environments don't match our production environments, so how do we start to address these? And again, we at Xceed, we believe that DevOps mentality and concepts will actually address these and start to show improvements in productivity and drive quality, reduce the costs and improve the time to market. So as we start the journey, the sort of key areas, understand what you're trying to do and where you're trying to get to. So you start to look at yourself and you start to take a baseline. So as you start to discover through the as-is estate, it's about what do you do well, what areas can you improve on, the gaps, what do we need to change, and then we get into the sort of what we call the three key domains within DevOps, which you need to look at, which is people, process, and technologies. So if we take this slide here where we look at the holistic view, people, it's around have you got the right people with the right skill sets, the right talent to be able to implement the change and to do the change. The process side, for me, process is key. A lot of people try to automate things and they use technology to drive processes rather than understand what they're trying to achieve. So if you can actually start from the right, as I sort of say, and understand what outcomes you'd like, then you can start to drive which technologies you want to use in the right way. And so those three areas sort of sit across the whole life cycle of change. And what I mean by that is where we start at the concept idea, i.e. before any developments even started to take place, right through the whole cycle into the service production take-on. So from a DevOps perspective, and I know that you ask many different people what DevOps means to them, you'll probably get many different answers. So from an Xceed point of view, we believe it's the elements across the SDLC, so the Systems Development Lifecycle, and into the service take-on, and then going from the production side, so from the ITSM and service management side of things, hooking back into those development and change to drive the right behaviours, the right disciplines, and drive the right levels of quality. So when we start to look at assessment, this is something that we did at a client site. So we took a traditional waterfall project and looked across the 8 phases of the SDLC. And this will start to give you an order of magnitude in terms of areas where you can focus on, where you can drive efficiencies, reduce costs, and then start to drive up the quality. If you look at this is elapsed time. So if you extrapolate this out and start to understand that it may be many different types of resources that you've got working in each of these phases. So it could be developers, it could be testers, it could be business analysts, it could be service delivery folk, and so on. Suddenly the elapsed time of sort of 200 plus days could turn into thousands of days. You then translate that into a cost. You can see where you can actually start to see those tangible benefits. And that's just from a manpower piece. So as we go through the rest of the presentation, when we start to talk about the different types of technologies and the other efficiencies, you'll see from Dan and Ben where other areas of cost savings can come in, where the efficiencies can be driven, and how you can drive out those best practices and proven practices so you get slicker and more efficient and drive up the productivity. So I'll just hand over to Dan, who's going to start to talk about pulling together, how you pull together a delivery plan, how you would then prioritise that and start to go into the execution phases. So Dan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Phil. So when we start to look at a DevOps strategy in an enterprise, we notice that the enterprise is really different. And it's different in the way that DevOps came to light in the likes of small companies such as Netflix and Flickr, etc., and some of these small innovative companies who spearheaded the DevOps movement. And when we look at an enterprise, we see that we sometimes have complex processes, segmented technology, siloed DevOps, and in some cases all of these seem opposed to what we'd like to achieve with the DevOps strategy. And it's almost like, in some cases, the enterprise seems like it's anti-DevOps. So what you need to do is you really need to structure an approach that is evolved for the DevOps, for the enterprise and DevOps within the enterprise. And I've listed out here on the slide some of the principles that can be useful. Taking stock of where you're going is very, very key to what you do. You need to take a step back and review the main drivers for your DevOps initiative. And are they realistic? And why? What's driving you to adopt DevOps? As Phil mentioned, it's probably going to be something with regards to time, cost, and quality. But within that, more specifically, what are the key drivers there? Is it innovation or bringing changes to customers faster? Is it around operational stability? Or what's the key driver there? Timing also is a big one. It's going to be quite a large transformation, and you need to really understand as an organisation, do you have the stomach for this, and is the timing right for it? Is there the push within the organisation? And then at the back of this, you need to crystallise what you're hoping to achieve and make sure that that's all mapped into the roadmap. Another point is that communication is really key. So we start to see that we need to engage key stakeholders for anything around DevOps to be introduced to be a success. So you need buy-in from the executives all the way down to your technical resources to make sure they're on board. And this, internally in your DevOps team as well, you're also going to want to be the change that you want to see throughout the organisation. So if you're looking at a pilot area and starting to engage in that sense, and we'll get onto this a bit later, you want to make sure that you've got a good set of communication within that particular area so that can be expanded and set as the blueprint for the rest of the organisation. Now, structure as well is an interesting point and needs to be considered, and that really goes into what you want to do in terms of setting up DevOps teaming. So do you want to set up something like a DevOps cell, which is cross-skilled operational development, QA and business people sitting in the same team? Do you want to look at cross-skilling existing teams in terms of getting an operations person to start walking in the shoes of dev, or vice versa, and getting the business aligned to development and QA, etc.? And do you need to review the organizational structure to make sure that your DevOps initiative really fits into the context of the organization and fitting into the context of where the organization wants to go? Now, one of the key structures that we have found useful is what's called the Center of Excellence that you can see there up in the top right. And this is, a lot of our clients find that they get some fantastic successes from the Center of Excellence, and one in particular I can think of. It might presuppose, the mere existence of DevOps presupposes that you have good exec engagement and organizational visibility, but it's also the COE itself and what it does that can be very, very powerful.
So Dan, I won't delve into the Centre of Excellence approach because I know you're going to go into that in the next slide, but I think to try and summarise what you said there, really around the structure and the implementation strategies, they're the things that you need to sort of plan up front and understand what's driving those. Mm-hmm. And then in parallel to that, it's around the communication, so getting the right buy-in from the right senior level stakeholders, the decision makers and the budget holders who are going to invest in this. And really it's about those CIOs, CTOs, heads of ADM, portfolio and program managers that are on the hook for delivery here, who are accountable. How do we make them look good? So how can we do it faster, better, cheaper for them? Yeah, is that a fair comment?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And it's really around structuring the communications in terms of getting the right information to the right people. A CEO is not going to want to see the same level of detail of wins as a developer or a tester.
I guess one other thing, and Ben will touch this, and we talk about socialising the benefits. This is around not only getting the buy-in up front, but as you get in and you start to build traction, how you celebrate the successes, how you publicise those successes and gain momentum to carry on scaling, yeah?
Yeah, a few good case studies never hurts adoption.
Exactly.
So we've alluded to the COE, and something that I see in the industry, and there was at a DevOps event a few weeks ago, and people said, you know, we've bought a few DevOps tools and we have a COE in place, and we're not really going anywhere with DevOps. And then when we started to chat about the content of the COE, it appeared that they didn't have the right guiding principles, and they probably didn't have the right people within that team. And that might be something that can be improved upon, and seems like it could do with some more structure. So when you're setting up a COE, it's important to have some clear guidelines around its operation, and as I mentioned before, it can be quite powerful. So you want to get the structure right. You want to make sure that a COE has the right level of authority, that it spans across the organisation in terms of business, ops, and dev to get that reach that DevOps needs. And you need the right blend of resources across there. As well as that, capabilities become quite important as well. And you can see on this slide that these are all the things that a COE will do for the organisation and the things it'll take care of. So you want to make adoption for the engagement as part of your engagement strategy as easy as possible, and remove any challenges around, you know, licensing infrastructure to make sure that, you know, it's self-service and adoption just flows quite seamlessly. Strategy and planning becomes very important. If you have an eye for upcoming projects, programs, you can sink in and make sure that you're engaged early and lock in your DevOps strategy and structure with some of those big strategic goals for the organisation. Technical expertise really is the next one here, and that goes without saying. If you're going to be rolling out across DevOps toolchain and continuous delivery toolchains, you're going to need the right level of SME and expertise. And whether that means training up people internally or recruiting, you need to get that skill level right. And cross-skilling is also a big one in terms of what we do for technical expertise. So making sure we have a nice blend of skills, I also consider key to the COE. And if this is all done right, it can be very, very powerful and can increase DevOps adoption, especially in the early stages.
That's great, thanks Dan. Just a couple of things to note from me on this then is obviously looking at this as a whole host and plethora of different things that you've got within the framework here. I guess one is that they're layered, so things can actually happen in parallel here. So where we talk about agile, we can, in the same way that we do agile delivery through a DevOps sort of initiative, and we deliver faster through different smaller chunks of functionality, you can do the same sort of thing here. So you can do things in parallel. It's not a sort of one followed by another sort of thing. So you can actually set this up quite quickly.
Yeah, I would agree, and these will overlap, and there could be, from a structural perspective, mini COEs along each of the pillars that I'll be addressing shortly. And there's no one-size-fits-all approach, really.
So really, we're talking about a framework here. COE is about discovering quickly what the best practices are, what's proven to work, and then how you roll those out, yeah?
Yeah, you could call it anything, but the principles are the same.
Okay, excellent, thanks.
With the complexities of the enterprise and how to introduce DevOps into the enterprise, we've touched on some of the considerations there, but we really need a framework to do this. So whether you're implementing any new type of technology or new way of doing things, or you have change, it's helpful to have a framework in place. One such framework that we've put together and we have seen that's quite successful is to cover these 5 areas in various forms, and also link them together and synergize them to get a good foot in the door for an enterprise for their DevOps adoption. So we're not saying this is a one-size-fits-all again approach, but it's a framework that we have found useful. I'll quickly roll through the 5 pillars as we see them. And the first one is service virtualization. And what we see here is a new breed of testing using the concept of simulation and really looking at reducing the constraints on environment and that ties in with your agility to test as an organization. So if we come back to the time cost quality continuum, we're looking at really reducing the cost of defects in environments, which also increases speed. And for each of these pillars, they all hit all four of the time, or all three of the time cost quality continuum, but there's going to be a major approach for each one of these. Automated testing is really the pinnacle of what you would need for continuous integration and delivery. When you commit code changes to any environment, you want that to kick off automated testing, and you want to reduce the manual efforts around testing, and that's particularly useful in increasing cost and quality. Release automation is the next one and looks at best practices for moving code and applications across environments in a maintainable way, and reduces some of the errors associated with that, and that's got a big push on increasing quality. Static code analytics. So what you're looking at here is making the invisible visible across your code bases in your organization. You can look at things like total cost of ownership, security enhancements or security issues, technical debt, and you can make better decisions based on that information. And then, of course, you've got the service management and process integration, and all these things you'll probably notice have a strong link in with things like dashboards, incident management, and associated processes, and that becomes quite integral to the way we approach DevOps to make sure they're aligned. Culture wraps across all of these. It needs to be done within a framework of DevOps culture, and we have a particular lens that I'll touch on later into how we address how we're going in terms of culture. So the organisation can start with any portion of these pillars and can move forward, and we're not suggesting to take a big bang approach to these, but these are some of the things that we feel you should be considering.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I guess what you're really saying here is that, back to the structure and the implementation strategies, you need to understand what you're trying to achieve, and then there's a framework that you need to be able to deploy that. Mm-hmm. I guess my question here is, you talk about these 5 pillars and the whole cultural thing. Mm-hmm. If you had to put a priority on one of these, what would you put first?
It's an interesting question, Phil. I think if you look at all of these, you've got to align to a large degree on what the pain points of the organisation is that you've structured up front. So if you're seeing large spend on environments, for example, you might want to start to simulate some of those environments. If you're seeing issues with code and that's not picked up within your functional testing or your NFT, maybe static code analysis is the right way to go. I would say, if I had to answer and you had a sort of gun to my head, I would say all things being equal in an organisation, I would pick RA, because I think release automation is a nice flow across the entire SDLC and also gives you some nice integration points into all these other ones. But again, no one size fits all. So.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good answer. What I would say is, with the release automation, you still need to get the precursors to that right, because if you don't and you start to automate releases and it's rubbish that's going in, you just release rubbish faster. So you build up a problem and a lot of technical debt. I guess it was a bit of a trick question. I guess the point that I'm trying to sort of push here is they're all equally important. Mm-hmm. They're all feeding into that cost-time quality continuum. And when you do deploy them, and if you deploy them discreetly, you need to have that holistic view so that you start to see the hooks into the other areas and understand the impacts of whether that's going to be a positive or negative impact. You need to make sure that you've mitigated any risk or issues around that, yeah?
Yeah, no, agreed.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll touch on this slide. The real power of DevX is how you use it and how you engage in the DevOps transformation with it. The end goal really is to have an organisation that exhibits all the characteristics of a DevOps organisation, and ideally you would move through a discrete set of activities. The first one being, we've touched on assessing where you are as an organisation, and one of the deliverables might be a SWOT analysis and overall DevOps strategy. You'll then go on to assessing where you are and coming up with a set of tool sets and coming up with an integrated DevOps tool chain, maybe running RFIs and moving on from there. From there, you can start to recommend the best approaches to take from a DevOps perspective, and then move straight into governance. So when we start to govern, that really links into the COE that I alluded to before, and how do you ensure that, you know, the DevOps mentality is embedded within the organisation. And then we're not saying end there. You need to monitor the environment and look at, you know, what your environment's health is, where you're seeing blockages, what your consumer engagement is like to the changes that you make, maybe with something like A and B testing, and you want quick feedback loops at every step of the way as well.
Okay, so I guess my takeaway from here is again, it's a continual sort of improvement cycle, so there's no one point to stop. You just don't do DevOps and then that's it. It's a continuous cycle that feeds into it perpetually, and you'll keep trying to look to improve, to get more efficient and continue to reduce costs, improve quality and improve speed to market, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. I'd agree with that.
Okay.
And when you go on this DevOps journey that was sort of looked at via the DevX framework, another lens that you can view this journey on is what I like, and it was first posted in a blog post last year, is the journey via the CAMS lens. So what you're looking at with CAMS is culture, automation, monitoring, sharing. So from a culture perspective, are you seeing that you have an aligned technical view of business outcomes across, you know, Dev, Ops, QA, and the business? Like the name suggests, it's bringing Dev and the Ops together. So have you facilitated the culture that's going to enable that? From an automation perspective, this really links into some of the tool sets that we have. And have we automated all that we can automate, and have we got a nice continuous delivery pipeline where we have a nice chain of tools linked in so you can go to development all the way into production with minimal manual output, with minimum manual intervention and higher quality and reduced costs to link back to that continuum. Monitoring, I touched on previously, but do we have visibility of all systems, all processes, and getting that key MI to the right people at the right times? There's some very interesting tools that do some analytics in terms of transaction times and, you know, a big data analytics approach in terms of all your various production-based systems. But are they in place, and can we get those quick feedback loops? Sharing is another very, very important point, and that means sharing with not just only knowledge, which, you know, to a large degree feeds back into culture, but do we have the right assets being shared across the organisation, facilitated by the likes of repositories, unified reports and dashboards, you know, getting released to the right people? And is the knowledge and all these assets and reports, are they flowing across the organisations? And again, all of these points need to be aligned to business objectives that were identified up front. And do they have the right slant on them, given where you want to be?
So I think I can't overemphasise enough here the monitoring and the sharing side of things. So for me, and it's probably a good time to take a couple of questions here that I've got on the chat box. So really, what you're doing, when you drive any change, you do it for a reason. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's that underlying data. You need to understand how you're currently doing something, and then how you benchmark against that, i.e. where are the improvements made? So where can I see the benefits? How can I realise them? How can I be sure that I'm doing the right thing? So getting the right data with integrity is key here, and then having that single source where you can start to see whether you're an exec, a project manager, a development head, a developer, a tester, or whatever, you can see where you are in that cycle, what you're doing, and how you're impacting the overall sort of delivery. A couple of questions that have come up, and I'll just answer these ones now. I have some colleagues who need to see the presentation. Will you be running the webinar again? We'll give details at the end, but it will be online, either via the Xceed website or on YouTube, and we'll be sending out details of that. We got another one saying DevOps is just a buzzword. Haven't organisations been doing this for some time? Well, actually, probably is a buzzword, but it's a concept. But it's a new sort of concept in terms of the automation, because I think the technology is there now to enable things to be done better. So a lot of it is common sense and best practices. And then the slides show estimated savings for each phase in the SDLC, but no actuals. Where did the estimates come from? This was an assessment of an actual waterfall project within a large retail bank. We do have the underlying figures in terms of monetary value, and this was just in one project, and it was to the tune of about £3 million that could be saved from manpower. Okay. Moving on then, as we move into Ben's going to be talking around some of the benefits and how to identify those, how to socialise and so on. Over to you, Ben.
Great, thanks very much, Phil. I think there's some really good points there and some intriguing questions come through from the audience, which is great to see. I think one of the key points that we've tried to emphasise throughout this presentation is the time, cost and quality continuum. But before embarking on any DevOps transformation, you should always baseline the current state of your SDLC. So understanding where you are will allow you to build a vision of where you want to get. So when we're looking at the current behaviours in the organisation, it's important to start considering where are we seeing the most defects, how much are we spending on environments, and how long does it take to build them. And there's other things as well that we should also consider. How long do our test cycles take? How many people are involved in those test cycles? And what percentage of our tests are automated? Do I have a lot of testers performing manual tests that then feeds back into the number of defects because someone has performed the test case wrong? These are all really important considerations to take. And I think Phil's points and slides at the very start of this presentation really emphasised the need to baseline your current performance levels and then actually highlight the opportunity statements that you've got in the organisation to add value and to add benefit across your end-to-end SDLC. I think the really important thing to do here is to highlight the essential need to encapsulate, once you've got these benefits, they feed into your business case. Being able to highlight how bad or how good your SDLC is will be really pinnacle and imperative to winning over your senior stakeholders who ultimately hold the budget for this. And I think Phil made it very, very clear earlier that it's all about making your senior stakeholders look good. So what are the things that they get a kicking for on a daily basis? Is it because their environments are down? Is it because they're spending too much on test environments or test cycles are taking too long? Highlighting these things in your business case and making it personal and what will actually resonate with your senior stakeholders and will actually enable you to get the purse strings released and ultimately get the funding enabled and released for you to drive through your DevOps transformation initiative. One thing I would always say is that it's always useful to speak to other organisations when you're performing this analysis and due diligence phase. Dan spoke about the likes of Netflix, Flickr, so on and so forth. There's a lot of people that have gone through these transformations as well. And before embarking on it, I would always say, speak to other organisations. They'll be able to tell you what's achievable and what's realistic. And I think those points there, making things achievable and making things realistic, are imperative and absolutes that you need to include in any business case when you're trying to sell the benefits of DevOps. And when we're looking at that business case, the targets should be established for 6, 12, and 18 months. And when we're talking about the continuous monitoring and the continuous progression look-backs, we should be saying, after 6 months, have we made our targets? Have we achieved the business case? And have we overachieved? These are kind of questions that we need to continuously ask ourselves in order to win over the dissenters in the organisation. Phil, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, no, I would just say sort of in my experience, especially when you get into the large, more complex enterprises, there's a lot of politics at play. So this pipeline view that you've got here of the different areas, I think helps to identify for the different stakeholders and what's in it for them. What tends to work is if you can make senior stakeholders look good, if you can make the people who are accountable for delivery to be able to do that, and do that well and quickly and on budget and on target in time, it becomes much easier to sell as a concept. So that's the only thing that I would add to that, Ben.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think those are good points. And just to recap on the point about, talking to other organisations, there's always the people you can talk to, the likes of Gartner, you can talk to Forrester, and actually there's a number of DevOps days and seminars that you can now attend, which would be really beneficial for your organisations to meet like-minded people and give them the opportunity to share those lessons learned and best practices when you're embarking on your own DevOps transformations. Dan, would you kindly move on to the next slide, please? Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we've talked about baselining, and again, time, cost, and quality all play into this baselining element. And we also need to reiterate the need to understand our business objectives. So when we're looking at our business objectives, do we want to increase online sales by 10%? Do we want to rationalise our high street presence and drive customer visits to our website up by 15%? Or do we want to actually create a more interactive user experience in store for our customers with their mobile devices? These are all very valid questions when we're looking at our DevOps transformation and setting the targets. And understanding these business objectives, they need to be aligned to your analysis phase. So, for instance, what we're trying to represent with this image is the view that we've got 3 platform areas where we've assessed their DevOps maturity, if you will. So we've looked at elements like what tooling are they using? Are we using solutions like continuous integration for Jenkins and Maven and so on and so forth? Have we got automated testing solutions like CA service virtualization? Are we using QTP, Selenium? Those kind of things. What processes are they using? Are they working in much more smaller silos? Do they not really collaborate? Do we have an onshore-offshore model? All these kind of things we need to assess. And what we need to understand is, does this platform feed into our core business objectives? Because if we understand that, we can then start to build a prioritized roadmap once we understand the maturity of these platforms. Aligning these platforms to maturity indexes and industry best practices will be ultimately key. And again, I can't emphasize enough the need and the essence to look at people, process, and tooling. When you're building the maturity indexes, make sure that they run consistently across the scorecards and the heat mapping that you perform on your various initiatives and platforms within your enterprises.
So Ben, just putting you on the spot here then, in your experience, where do you see enterprises or the clients in terms of this maturity scale that you're talking about?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, Phil. So I think typically, if we look at organisations that tend to have a digital presence, those that we would encompass a service-orientated architecture or a composite application stack, those organisations tend to be the ones that are a lot more mature in their adoption of DevOps and their capability to apply it in their enterprise. I think generally what we would also consider is that organisations that are slightly more monolithic, that tend to have antiquated architecture and legacy systems, tend to run batch and mainframes, they tend to be a lot slower. So people in the financial services sector, insurance, so on and so forth, tend to be much more lower on the maturity scale. So we would tend to see those in the lower 2s and the higher 3s.
So what you're really talking about there is people with that legacy architecture that's evolved over a number of probably decades. It's more difficult to change and introduce that sort of automation.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I would say is that there's a lot of evidence from Gartner that's been released over the last 6 or 7 months that suggests that those organisations that we talk about in the slightly more monolithic and legacy architecture space will be kind of transcending and adopting DevOps en masse in 2015. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them catching up with those people that have the SOA-based architecture.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thanks. And thanks for moving on to the next slide, Dan. That's great. So I think when Dan called back to his 4 pillars earlier around, service virtualization, RA, test automation, so on and so forth, it's really key to, as part of your DevOps enterprise adoption, to establish a suite of tools that you can build an integrated ecosystem with. And we've created this diagram just to kind of emphasize the need and the purpose for that. When Dan alluded to his DevOps COE earlier, we talked about governance and control. And I think if we look back to 2008 and the global financial crisis, a lot of organizations looked at consolidating their IT suite, rationalizing their tool sets, and centralizing the control of that. I think as we see an upward turn in the economy, a lot of organizations will start to segregate their IT operations and mobilize them to be much closer to their business units, which ultimately could cause a proliferation of tool sets with lots of duplicated agendas. And having that DevOps Center of Excellence capability to outline an enterprise-class suite of tools is absolutely essential. What we don't want to do is decentralize the control and then start to lose view of where we're spending money. So, senior stakeholders might get budgets at the end of the year and see that there's a duplication in cost where we've bought two products which do exactly the same thing. What I would say is it's really important to understand what the handoffs between these tools are, and then to re-emphasize Phil's point about the process. If we understand the process, we can then eliminate the waste and build the integration points between these solutions. So for instance, if I'm using CA release automation to orchestrate my release processes, I can then use something like SonarQube to quality check the code before it's deployed into an environment. Once the deployment's happened, I can then run some Selenium tests or something with QTP, or I can actually start to perform performance tests with Load Runner. So it's really important to understand how all this hangs together. And at the same time, what I would say is that you really need to ensure that it's a collaborative working ethos between your DevOps Center of Excellence, who control the Enterprise Class Suite, and your federated members. Federated members, developers, testers will actually really want to use solutions from the open source catalog, so the likes of Maven, Jenkins, so on and so forth. And you should really embrace these solutions and bring them into the enterprise. What I would say is try to avoid running them on a desktop underneath someone's desk, because I've heard lots of stories about source control tools being used in the enterprise, and then ultimately these desktops getting wiped. So if you're going to use open source, make sure it's industrialized, you've got the right knowledge and the right controls for support around them. Dan, I think we can move on, or Phil, if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, no, I'd just say in terms of the overheads and the cost, it's not just the licensing, it's also people, it's infrastructure and so on. So when you start to build this up for a business case for your senior stakeholders, let's remember that there's additional costs and overheads in there as well. Yeah,
absolutely. So we've just tried to encapsulate in this infograph, people, technology and process, and bringing those all together, making sure that those are aligned to the vision of the organisation and the strategic goals, making sure that we've got the right leadership, and actually making sure that all that is creating the perfect storm with our strategy so that we can deliver those results. And what I really want to do just very quickly is give you some defined targets for your enterprise to consider when you're looking at embracing DevOps after this webinar. So, next week, start to sell the benefits of DevOps to your senior stakeholders and start to identify champions throughout your organisation. It's not going to be an easy battle, so make sure you've got well-respected and well-trusted people on your side that can help fight that battle with you. Over the next 3 months, baseline your current performance levels and build the vision, and actually start to identify pilot areas for your DevOps adoption. And what I would say when you're looking at the pilot areas, try to be a little bit brave, but box clever. So you don't want to be running a pilot in an overly complex architecture in the first instance. Look at somewhere you can build some momentum, get some quick wins, and start to promote the value through wikis, town halls, forums, and webinars such as this. Next 6 months, review the findings of your pilot, socialise. It's really important to evangelise the benefits and the outcomes of the pilot, and then perform some lessons learned. So what worked, what didn't work, do we have the right people, do we have the right tools, and then continuous feedback loops all the way through that iterative life cycle of this process. And then ultimately, we've spoken about the heat mapping processes and looking at the scalability of the enterprise. Analyse the entirety of your organisation. How mature are they? Build your prioritised roadmap and get ready to execute.
That's great, Ben. Thanks very much. I'm conscious that we were on a 45-minute sort of webinar, so I'm just going to go into a couple of questions and then wrap up and summarise some of the key points. So some questions that we've had come through on the chat link. I found that talking in terms of infrastructure as code instead of DevOps has worked better in my organisation as a key part of DevOps. Developers get this. I wouldn't disagree with that, but and this just goes back to the point that there are a number of discrete domains that go together to make up the concept of DevOps, and that's all that DevOps is. It's a concept. So you tailor it to your own unique organisational needs, and if that means tailoring the language, then I would do that. So it's not just infrastructure as a code, it's software-defined infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And it's using the language that the stakeholders will understand and buy into. Another one is, how do we know whether DevOps will work for us? Can you quantify success of DevOps investment? So again, it's back to what we've said all along. It's the alignment to the business drivers, why you're actually doing it, and generally it's around cost, quality, and time. And it is the cost element, but also what you deliver quicker gives you a competitive edge. So it could be a business reason for doing it. You'd need to look at it on an individual basis, but yes, you can quantify. So you can pull a business case together in terms of what you're investing. And the example of that is, as we talked about, the potential £3 million save just in man hours on a traditional waterfall project. Another one is, do you have your own preferred software portfolio for supporting DevOps? So I think one of the key things that I'd say, the key focus for me is around people and process. Technology is evolving all the time. Yes, we do have partners that we look to strategically align with, but that said, we will look at each individual engagement and put the right solution in place. So there are some best of breed, but it depends again what your enterprise driving costs are. So is there an option to bring in open source? Is it that you want enterprise agreement licenses? All of those sorts of things. So we do have some things that we would say are probably best in class, but it comes back to what you're trying to achieve. That's all of the questions that have come in so far on the chat. So if anybody out there has got any more questions, please do type them in now as I sort of go into the next couple of slides, which sort of wrap up in terms of summarising what we're doing. So if you remember at the start, this was our holistic view of what we believe the scope of DevOps is about. In terms of some of the benefits, what we've started to see is we can reduce test cycles by automating by up to 75%. We can do service automation and reduce test environment spend by 2.5 million. That's an actual cost save that we saw in one of our customers. And then when you get into the release automation, it's looking at those deployment where you've got rigid change management, time-consuming people costs. You can reduce those deployment costs by up to 65% on the route to live. Another question that came in is, we operate in an onshore-offshore model. How do you think DevOps can work here? So again, it's not how DevOps works, it's the concept. And this comes back to the people, and I think we've said it underlying throughout this is collaboration and how we can collaborate. So it's not just around tools to do automation, it's how you can share knowledge, have that integrated environment, see who's doing what. And if you look at what a lot of the big sort of tech companies do now, they do tend to do a follow-the-sun model. And within that, with the automation, so you can have offshore, onshore, nearshore, and pass the baton over. Or ultimately, as you start to automate things, you let the automated cycles run with the appropriate monitoring in place, and they run overnight while you're not there, sort of thing. So you pick it up in the morning, and everything's sort of gone into an integrated bundle and a build.
Yeah, Phil, it's Ben here. I just wanted to reiterate that on the collaboration piece. I think that's a really good point. And there's lots of tools out there now that kind of help people that are in that onshore-offshore model to share the knowledge continuously. So there's solutions like Slack. We can use things like Skype and Tandberg to make sure that we get a face-to-face environment with our onshore-offshore model. So those kind of things are really important as well to encapsulate.
Okay. Another question that's come through is, with increasing development of digital commerce, do you see DevOps as essential for organisations? Again, I would say DevOps is a concept, and it's about how you do those continuous improvements to do things better. And ultimately, as a business, so a commerce, whether it's digital or not, you want to do things to reduce the cost-income ratio. So you want to produce quality services and products, but you want to do a good entry point so that people will sort of buy them or take them up. So DevOps I don't see as essential, but in terms of if you want to do things faster, cheaper, better, then yes, I would start to look at these concepts and where you can look at these efficiencies and these continuous improvements through this, things like the Centre of Excellence structure, where you can roll out best and proven practices and learn quickly from any failures. But don't just take it from me. On the screen now we've got some what other people are saying in terms of the benefits. So the one that I would sort of probably call out here is the IBM and Forrester one. So development teams that consistently deliver at the fastest cycle times enjoy the highest business satisfaction. So this is where you're into the sort of, I guess, the Facebooks, the Amazons and the like, and not everybody's going to have the risk appetite to do that, and it's getting the balance right. So you might not want to be doing release cycles every day or every hour, and then sort of affect the stability in production, but what you want to be able to do is release functionality in as and when appropriate, with the right quality and the right cost point. We've talked about the questions. We've got a couple of minutes left. If anybody's got any other questions, please type them in. What I would say is thank you very much to Cindy and our Marcoms team for helping pull all of this together. Jason for the support in the background on the tech side of things. To Dan and Ben in terms of pulling the slides together. Thank you very much, guys. If you found this of interest, we will be putting it up onto the web, either on the Xceed website or into YouTube, where you can view this again. What we'll also do is Cindy and the team will be following up with the people that registered for this, so we'll be able to give out copies of the slide decks, and we'd be happy to take any questions that you have offline, whether it's just an ad hoc question or whether you want to look at, say, doing an assessment and any help in what you're trying to do on your journey and transformation here. So all that's left for me to say is thank you very much to everybody taking the time out of your diary today. I know that you're all very busy. Hopefully you will have found this insight very useful, and that you'll be able to take some of this and apply it into your workplace. So thank you very much, and good day.